Okay, chapter 2 of The Summer of the Sea Serpent. Okay, you gotta see the first page. It's super cool. So there's Jack and Annie in the treehouse. Chapter 2, The Water Knight. A salty breeze blew into the treehouse. Seagulls screeched overhead. Jack and Annie looked out the treehouse window. Read the beginning of Merlin's rhyme again, said Annie. Jack took the shell from his pocket and he read out loud. Before night falls on this long summer day, a shining sword must find its way into your hands and out of the gloom, or Camelot's king shall meet his doom. Jack looked up at the sky. The sun was almost directly overhead. It must be around noon now, he said. We don't have much time. What should we do first? Said Annie. Jack looked back at the rhyme and read it out loud. To begin your quest for the Sword of Light, call for the help of the Water Knight. Oh, easy, said Annie. It is, said Jack. Sure, said Annie. If he's a water knight, he's probably down by the water. She started down the steep rocky hill that led to the nearest cove. Jack stuffed the shell back in his pocket. But who is the water knight? He yelled as he followed Annie. It doesn't matter, she yelled. We just have to go down to the water and call for his help. They climbed over large boulders toward the cove. The boulders were slippery, but Jack's sneakers kept him from slipping. A damp breeze blew from the sea. It made his skin and clothes feel clammy. When they got to the shore, Jack wiped the mist off his glasses and looked around. The wide beach was covered with silvery pebbles, shells, and rows of sea foam. Sandpipers and gulls picked at the tangled ribbons of soggy seaweed. The tide must be out, said Jack, and he studied the cliffs above the cove. I don't know how a knight can get down here. A horse could never make it over all of these rocks, he said. Let's just do what the rhyme says, said Annie, and then we'll see what happens. Annie reached out her arms, and she closed her eyes. She raised her head toward the sky and said, Oh, water knight, whoever you are, come here and help Jack and Annie. Oh, brother, Jack muttered to himself. Suddenly they heard the wild cries of seagulls. Look, Jack, said Annie, and she pointed toward the middle of the cove. Seabirds were screeching and flapping above a giant swirl of spray and foam. The swirl was spinning just above the surface of the water headed toward the beach. Wow, said Annie. She took off running across the sand. Come back, shouted Jack. No, come look, said Annie. Jack hurried to the edge of the surf. Before the blur of spinning spray and foam, he saw the silver helmet of a knight appear above the water. He saw silver breast armor, and then a strange creature burst through the surface, carrying the knight on its back. The creature had a horse's head and neck and front legs, but instead of back legs, it had a long, silvery fish's tail. With the water knight on its back, the horse creature half galloped and half swam through the cove. Seagulls shrieked wildly overhead, following the pair toward the shore. As the knight drew closer to the edge of the water, he looked straight at Jack and Annie. He raised his gloved hand and beckoned to them. Okay, we're coming, cried Annie. She started pulling off her sneakers. Wait, let's think about this, cried Jack. We don't have time, said Annie. He wants to help us. He's like that stag that came for us in Camelot. No, he isn't, said Jack. He's much weirder. But Annie tossed her sneakers onto the rocks and splashed through the shallow water. The knight held out its hand and helped her onto the strange horse creature. The creature slapped its fish's tail against the water, sending up a fountain of spray. Come on, Jack, Annie yelled. We can't waste time. That is a crazy-looking fish horse. I would be a little scared. Annie's right, Jack thought. They had to find the Sword of Light before nightfall. He pulled off his sneakers and tossed them up onto the rocks near Annie's. Then he stepped into the cold water and waded out to the night. Annie helped pull Jack up onto the horse creature, and he sat on its scaly tail and clung to Annie while she held on tightly to the water knight's tunic. The silvery fish's tail slapped the water. A shower of spray rained down on Jack, and he closed his eyes. Onward, he said faintly. The water knight turned away from the shore. With more slaps of its tail, the horse creature began galloping and swimming across the cove. The seagulls shrieked wildly as they swooped after them. Bumping up and down, Jack clung desperately to Annie, and he kept his eyes squeezed shut and tried really hard not to fall off. As they sped across the cove, the water knight guided his steeds steadily over each ripple and wave. The bumpy ride soon turned into a smooth one. "This is great," said Annie. Jack opened his eyes. With the wind and spray whipping his face and hair, he began to feel more excited than scared. "I'll bet he's taking us to the Sword of Light," cried Annie. "We'll be done with our mission in no time." That would be too easy, thought Jack. But as they sped over the waves, he grew hopeful. Maybe she's right. Maybe it will be easy, he thought. Not all of our missions have to be hard. But what about the rest of the stuff in the rhyme? What about... Before Jack could finish his thought, the strange horse creature stopped and reared up. Jack and Annie tumbled over its fishtail and splashed into the cold water. They sank for a moment and then bobbed back up to the surface, frantically treading water. They looked up at the water knight and the horse. The knight lifted his arm into the air and he pointed to a pile of boulders near the base of a nearby cliff. Then he spread the fingers of his gloved hand in a gesture of farewell. "Bye! Thanks!" shouted Annie. The horse creature slapped its fish's tail and took off in a mountain of spray and foam. With the gulls circling above them, the mysterious pair whirled toward the passage between the cliffs that led out to the sea. In a moment, they vanished into the open water beyond.